And now we pick up with part 2. Here we have the 5 pillars. The pillars are faith or witness, prayer, charity or zakat, fasting, and pilgrimage or hajj. The first one, faith or witness, essentially is summed up by the most essential creedal statement, if you will, of Islam. And you witness to this: there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the prophet of Allah. This statement is, again, essentially Islam's most essential creed. And it's not a statement that is meant to compete with other creedal statements from the other monotheistic traditions, but just to speak to Muslims, that for Muslims, there is no God but Allah. And that's a general statement, that there is no God but Allah or Yahweh, and that Muhammad is the prophet of Allah, and Allah is the way in which God expresses God's self, as Allah, as Yahweh expresses Yahweh's self to the Arab peoples, and that Muhammad is the prophet of God for the Arab peoples. That second one, prayer, or for prayer, it's important in this pillar for Muslims to pray 5 times a day, and that in doing so, in addition to doing so, they perform ritual ablutions with water, which is a cleansing of hands and face in a ritualistic way, and that they face the direction of Mecca when they do so. And as they do so, they recite a series of prayers and passages from the Quran, bowing and kneeling. The third one, charity or zakat, is essential. It's one that was instituted by Muhammad so that no one like the Quraysh tribe could rise up and take power, more power than needed for survival, it's sort of a curb on greed and a curb on accumulating more wealth than is needed. And so in this pillar of charity, at the end of the year, each year, Muslims are required to donate at least 2.5% of their accumulated wealth to needy Muslims, so that there is a distribution of wealth and goods, so as to take care of the poor, to take care of the needy, and so that there is justice in that regard. Number 4, fasting is essential, and so that during the entire month of Ramadan, the 9th month of the Islamic year, Muslims abstain from food, drink, sex, and smoking from sunup to sundown. And this is very much sort of a commemoration of Muhammad's first revelation, but also it's a continuation of the tradition that was done in the pre-Islamic time during the month of Ramadan that Muhammad was partaking in when he received the first revelation. And so that the abstinence from these particular things, of food, drink, and smoke, any goods that would be purchased, as Muhammad did, it's typically the case that money that would have gone towards those things would go towards helping the poor who don't have anything. Number 5, pilgrimage. This one is so interesting. Again, it's a reclaiming or a continuation of that early folk religion, that there already was in place a pilgrimage to Mecca, known as the Hajj. So this is something that continues to be a part of the religion of Arabs through Islam. So if Muslims Muslims are called to make a pilgrimage, to make a Hajj to the city of Mecca. And I think this is a beautiful image of a modern Hajj taking place. So each religion comes to identify a unique problem with the world and humanity. So for Islam, What's the problem that is identified? So the problem is that we are prideful, and we seek self-reliance apart from God, and we forget or deny our place sort of as creatures, as being created, beings that were created to worship God and to serve one another. And the worship of God and the service of one's neighbor is so combined, so essential in Islam as well as in other traditions. So what's the solution? What's the solution to this greed? It is to submit to God through the 5 pillars. Sort of Muhammad's effort to curb greed, and you could see that each of those are instituted in an effort to do so. So what's the ultimate goal of Islam? Well, it's always hard to come up with a goal of every tradition, but I would say that it's pretty safe to say that one of the, if not the most important goal of Islam, ultimately, would be to be a good Muslim, to give oneself entirely to Allah, and in so doing, one day have the opportunity to live in paradise, an otherworldly place where anything and everything that one wanted or needed to live would be obtained, and would be obtained for eternity in the service of Allah. This is a very similar understanding of sort of heaven, and it's one that also comes from Zoroastrianism, sort of this ideal otherworldly reality that is depicted not only, as I said, in Christianity, but also in Zoroastrianism as well. So, what does Islam say about humanity? Well, humans must fight. They must fight through they must fight the greater jihad against the lower self that can cause an attitude of prideful self-reliance and self-worship. So you notice here I've used the word jihad. That is a word that's often batted around, and unfortunately it's not always understood as having some nuance. So of course there was an understanding of jihad, which means to battle, which means to struggle against, to struggle with, in the use of the Quran's use of this word. It certainly is used to describe self-defense, a defense that is just, is holy, and that you could even describe as warfare if needed. But Muhammad understood that kind of physical outward struggle, outward fighting in defense of one's life as the lesser jihad, as the lesser struggle, as something that you did only if necessary. But there was always a struggle that would be going on. There would always be a jihad waged against the lower self, the prideful self, that self that wants to obtain and take as much as one wants, even above one's own needs, to be selfish. And he understood this as something that would be tantamount to sort of idolatry, and where you would. It's truly the worship of self to be self-centered, and this is not God's way. God's way is for Allah's way is for individuals to control that lower self. And so when one masters the lower self, one has completely submitted to God and thus become fully human, truly human in doing so. So there are a few takeaways I really want to stress really quickly that I hope were clear throughout this, but I just want to reemphasize them very quickly. Number one, Islam is a complex and delicate fusion of sort of the pre-Islamic Arabian folk religion that Muhammad and the other Arabs of the time adopted, or rather inherited. So there's very much that cultural norm there, and that is not necessarily curbed entirely, because again, Islam is supposed to be the way in which God speaks to the Arab world. So there, as I said, is a delicate fusion between pre-Islamic Arabian folk religion, sort of Zoroastrianism. Some of that was already very present there, even before any serious encounters with Judaism or Christianity. And then, of course, there's a fusion, added to this fusion is of Judaism and Christianity. And as I said, it's primarily during that Yathrib, Medina period where that fusion really takes place. So it's a combination of these sort of four worldviews, religious, that themselves had their own evolutions and own developments, and were at their own stages of development when Islam was developing. And number two, Muhammad never intended for Islam to supersede Judaism or Christianity. And I think there's truly a misconception by Muslims and non-Muslims alike today, and it's unfortunate. There's a belief that Islam is the third religion to come along. That's the monotheistic tradition, and thus many believe that Muslims, and some do, believe that Islam is to supersede, is to overtake, is the true revelation, is the one that corrects all the other prior revelations from Christianity and Judaism of the God Yahweh, which ultimately is obvious is Allah. And again, as I've said before, to say that Muslims worship Allah is just to say that Muslims worship God. And it was very much the case that those in Yathrib that Muhammad encountered, the Jews and the Christians, they would have spoke the language of the Arabian Peninsula, and when they referred to God, they would not have said Yahweh, they would not have said God, they would have said Allah, because that is the word for God in Arabic. So even in their prayers then to God, they would have prayed to Allah. And so Muhammad, seeing this, naturally would have said, I pray to Allah as well. And so this sort of this understanding of God as Allah in that area, speaking to humanity, and having a message of monotheism, of worshiping only God alone, and doing so through prophets within both the Christian and the Jewish traditions. Muhammad understood this to be that Islam was simply the Arab version of this, and that finally the people of Arabia would have a prophet, and they would have their own unique way of encountering and of worshiping Yahweh or Allah, the same one and the same God, just using different terms to identify that particular monotheistic God, a God of monotheism, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, very much, again, aligned with Judaism and Christianity. And so it is that we really see that Muhammad, there's almost an attempt to reconcile not only to change to sort of evolve the religious identity of the people of Arabia in terms of his particular the Arab clans and their monotheistic ways, and to transform them to their polytheistic ways, to transform those ways into a monotheistic understanding of God, but also to reconcile Christianity and Judaism in some ways, and to really say that there are three ways that Jews have their way of connecting with God. The Christians have their way with connecting with that same God, and now Muslims have their way of connecting with that same God. And we see the unique flavor of that in all of these traditions. So, now that those things are established, hopefully we have a deeper, more robust understanding of the complexity that is Islam.